Hello, and welcome to Whatever Wednesday with Burkhart Books, the podcast. I'm your host, Dianne Burkhart. I hope you'll subscribe and join me every Wednesday for, well, whatever. Let's get on with our show today. Hello and happy April 13th, 2022. Thank you so much for joining me today. My podcast is going to be a little bit shorter than usual today because I woke up with a sore throat and it's kind of hurting to talk. So we're going to skip reading part of the 4th chapter in Into the West, the Orphan Train today because I just don't think my voice can take it. But I did want to come on and talk about the trip that we just took. My bonus daughter, Mary, wanted to go see see if I can remember how to say this now, Neuschwanstein Castle in Munich. And I've always wanted to see it too, ever since we moved to Germany. So I was all for this trip. And my husband decided, since he could take one trip and make both his daughter and his wife happy, why not do it? So we went there this weekend, which is probably why I have a sore throat, because we climbed a mountain in the Alps in a snowstorm. It was crazy, but it's one of those things that I am always going to be so grateful that I can say that I did that. I hiked up a mountain in the Alps in the snow. And thank God they had a nice hot chocolate stand at the top, and we even got a free cookie. So it was all worth it. Plus, the castle is gorgeous, and the story of Ludwig is just incredible. If you have never read about the Mad King, do it. The guy is really fascinating. We got to tour 3 different castles while we were on this trip. 2 we got to go into, and 1 we just saw from afar. But these places were just amazing. The ideas this man had were ahead of his time. There was one of his castles that he spent a lot of time in that they had what is called the magic table. It would sink down into the floor and go down into the kitchen where the servants would fill it with food, and then they would raise it back up in front of the king so that he could have dinner. At this point in history, that is an amazing achievement. And a lot of the things in these castles were very progressive, which is probably what brought about the early end to his life, too. At this point in time, when he was building his castles, Bavaria was a very, very Catholic area, and it still is to this day. But if you walk through his castles, there are murals there that have a lot of different elements that are not so much in line with Catholicism. There was one picture that I noticed in, I believe it was in the Neuschwanstein castle, that had a man holding a book. And I'm not sure who this man was. I should have asked and I didn't. But the book that he had an inverted star and a crescent moon on the cover of the book. There is no way that this would have been well received by the representatives of the Vatican, as you can well imagine. And whenever the country started moving towards a more modern government and getting away from monarchies, you can imagine that the new government was probably very eager to get rid of somebody who wasn't 100% behind the Catholic Church in this area. So if you ever do get a chance to read about Ludwig and his castles, you should do it. It's amazing. And if you'd like to see some of the photos, I'm going to put them on my blog page at burkhartbooks.com/blog-ramblings. And there will be a link to it in the description of this podcast. So just find the link. The photos from these castles are absolutely amazing. The views were breathtaking, and we just had so much fun. One of the other things that was fascinating about this was the different elements of architecture that he brought in. You can see designs that are from Greek influence, from Italian. There was also representation of the Buddhist wheel of life in a mosaic design on one of the floors. It really is a very eclectic collection of art and representation, from the architecture and the paintings and the murals and the mosaics. He had vases from different countries and different design styles. Now, there was a lot of Christian representation as well. He had the apostles, he had saints, he had angels. There was all kinds of things that was representing the Christian faith. But the fact that he mixed and blended all of these other religious beliefs and cultures into the artwork in the castle was very progressive for this time period. At one point during the tour, our guide was telling us how the first castle that we toured, I'm sorry I cannot remember it right now, I'll put it in the blog post, but the first castle was the one that he actually spent a lot of time living in. And even though it was a very nice, beautiful castle with enough room to have a few parties, Ludwig never did. He was mostly a recluse. He lived in this castle, just him and his servants. Apparently, two of his best friends were, I believe it was his doctor and his cook. His cook was one of his best friends, which could also explain why he ended up gaining a lot of weight later in life, because he lived in this castle with his cook and a few servants and spent all of his time reading and eating. Whenever we heard about this, I turned to my husband and I said, I think I know who I was in a former life. My favorite pastimes, reading and gourmet food. So now this really was a rather whirlwind trip for us. We left Friday afternoon, spent Saturday touring the castles, and then hit the train and came back home on Sunday. We had a few bumps on the way home and we ended up getting in really late, but it was a fun trip. We had so much fun. My husband has already started planning our next trip, which will be a guided tour of the battlefields of Normandy. That one is going to be very sad, but also as somebody who's fascinated with history, it will be very, very interesting to me. I've read so much about this era in history. I really want to see these landmarks. I think anybody who's fascinated with history would want to see. And don't worry, whenever we make this next trip, I'll be sure to post photos from those as well. So now, before my voice completely gives out, let me remind you that I, Dianne Burkhart, write the Into the West Saga serial book collection under the pen name Stephen Burkhart. If you go to burkhartbooks.com/books, you can see all of the titles that are currently available in this collection. The books go in order from Into the West, The Orphan Train, Into the West, A New Home, Into the West, Sharon Springs, Into the West, Most Wanted, Into the West, To Save Them All, Into the West, The Last Showdown, and the last book, which is coming soon, I promise, cross my heart, Into the West, Family Ties. And that will close out the Into the West Saga serial. And the next serial collection that will be coming out after this one will be Surviving the West, taking a few characters from Into the West and moving them over and having them start their own lives in surviving the West. So be sure to go to my website, check out all the books. If you read them, please leave a review. It doesn't matter how long it is, as long as there's a few words. That's all that matters on Amazon.com. And any book that gets more than 10 reviews gets boosted in the exposure rating. So please leave a review. For most authors, getting a review is a good thing. But for indie authors, it's everything. Reviews help us get sales. And when you're only making a few cents off of every book, the more sales you make, the better it is. Because it's really tough to sell indie books. Trust me. Especially in the historical fiction/Western category. But most of us don't do it for the money. We do it because we love it. I know I do. Now, don't get me wrong, I want to make money at this too. Who wouldn't? But even while I'm not making money, it's still fun. I love writing them, and I hope you love reading them. That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me on this Wednesday. I hope you all have a wonderful Easter weekend. We're going to be having some great fun. I think we might even squeeze in a trip to the zoo here. Another site we haven't seen here in Dusseldorf yet, so maybe I'll share some photos of that with you all next week. Have a great weekend, happy Easter, and hope you'll join me next Wednesday when we will have more reading from Into the West, The Orphan Train, and hopefully we can finish that book out. Until then.